you like history? Historians say if we neglect our history, we're destined to repeat it. There's a lot of history inside this antique sewing box. Let's see if we can thread together a little of our American past. In 1751, just 25 years before we declared our independence from Great Britain, Benjamin Franklin wrote a satirical commentary in the Pennsylvania Gazette. He suggested that since the British were so fond of sending convicted felons to the colonies, maybe we should send them a gift of rattlesnakes. This black thread reminds me of the dark realities of this time in our American past. 3 years later, in 1754, Franklin created what became known as our first political cartoon. It was a snake divided into sections. The sections represented our colonies, and beneath the drawing were the words "join or die." It played upon the common superstition that a snake that had been cut into pieces could come back to life if joined together before sunset. The cartoon was meant to encourage the colonies to work together during the French and Indian War. The cartoon reminds me of the wit and wisdom of the American people that is just as strong today. In March of 1770, just 6 years before we declared our independence from Great Britain, the British colonists were suffering under the weight of heavy taxes without a voice in the British government. Later, the phrase "taxation without representation" became popular. In Boston, a small mob provoked a group of British soldiers to fire upon a crowd. 5 died as a result. Those who wanted us to secede from Great Britain used the event to nurture hatred by calling it the Boston Massacre. This red thread reminds me of the blood that has been shed so that you and I can remain free. In 1773, the British colonists rebelled against taxation without representation by throwing crates of tea off British ships into the Boston harbor. The Boston Tea Party, as it became known, symbolized that the colonists refused to be tread upon. This brown thread reminds me of the tea that soaked in the harbor that day. Now this yellow thread reminds me of the American spirit. The American spirit as evidenced in some of our earliest flags. For example, the Gadsden flag, with the popular rattlesnake and the words "Don't tread on me." These early flags show our history in many ways. For example, the snake has 13 rattles representing our first 13 colonies. This blue thread reminds me of the British royalty, also known as the Blue Bloods. Our first national flag was a combination of the British Union Jack and 13 stripes representing our first 13 colonies. The flag is called the Grand Union. Legend says that in June of 1776, just a few short days before we declared our independence from Great Britain, George Washington, George Ross, and Robert Morris met in a Philadelphia upholstery shop to discuss a flag for our new land. George Washington suggested a 6-pointed star because he believed the 5-pointed star would be too difficult for the seamstresses to make. Without a word, the seamstress removed a piece of paper from her box. She carefully folded the paper and made a single cut. She unfolded a perfect 5-pointed star. And that's how it all began, according to Betsy Ross. July 4th, 1776, The Second Continental Congress adopted our Declaration of Independence. John Hancock, as President of the Congress, was the only one to sign the document on that day. Later, on August the 2nd, the remaining 55 delegates began to sign. All the men knew that their act of rebellion put them in danger of death from the British Crown. But legend says that John Hancock signed his name large so that King George would have no doubt as to who had taken this stand. To this day, the request for a signature is often stated, "Give me a John Hancock." June 14, 1777. Almost a year later, but still far short of actually winning our independence from Great Britain, the American Congress adopted the Betsy Ross flag as our first official flag. Each year on June 14th, we celebrate Flag Day. July 4th, 1826. The last two remaining signers of our Declaration of Independence died. Both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were two of the most prominent founders of our new land. Both served as President of the United States. Ironically, both died exactly 50 years after the birth of our new nation. And in 1959, our 50th star was added to our flag with the adoption of Hawaii as our 50th state. Today, over 300 million people live in the United States of America. We live with more freedom, liberty, and justice than any other people on earth. We're a blend of many cultures, races, religions, and beliefs. We stand united in our love of this great land and the freedom it brings. The men and women of our armed forces pledge to give their lives so that we may maintain those freedoms. We pledge our allegiance to a symbol that says, "Don't tread on me." We began as 13 colonies, represented by 13 red and white stripes. We stand today as 50 United States, represented by 50 stars on a canton of blue, representing a new constellation. Yes, we are proud. And this is our red, white,